by Taika Waititi, and it is the third film in the Thor franchise, and it is, I don't know, 17th in Marvel for the MCU. So I'm going to start with what I liked about this movie. I think that what worked really well was the style that the director brought to it. I found it to be very unique and very different, a very different change of pace from what I'm used to seeing from the rest of the Marvel movies. There are just a couple of things that I didn't like about it, but I'm going to get into that a little later. I respect the ambition of it. It seems like it's one man's vision of what this movie should have been, and it really comes across that way. So, huge pat on the back for him. I think that he did a really good job in terms of that. The only other Marvel movie that I think comes as close in terms of uniqueness from the director, like the style that the director brings into the movie, is Iron Man 3. But that movie didn't work for a number of reasons behind the camera. They wouldn't let him do everything that he wanted. But this isn't an Iron Man 3 review, this is a Ragnarok review. So, apart from the uniqueness of how this movie felt while watching it, I also found a couple of other things that I liked. It's sort of strange because for everything that I liked in the movie, I also didn't like parts of that thing. So I'll give you an example. This is an action comedy above all else, and there are two things that you need in order to make an action comedy work. The action and the comedy. And quite frankly, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'll start with the action. I think that the opening action scene is the best one. I had the most fun during it, and I thought that it was the most cohesive, the easiest to follow, it had the best energy to it, so forth. Also the one with Thor and Hulk I thought was kind of fun. Everything else, I thought that it wasn't that good in terms of action. I didn't like the energy. It all felt wrong when I was watching it. It was very hard to follow what was going on, especially in the closer hand-to-hand combat sequences. The camera was moving around too much. There were far too many edits. It was very difficult to keep up. And it didn't feel like... The action is just so subpar to what I would have expected from a movie that really does try to focus on the action. It was very disappointing. I was surprised to be disappointed, but I was still disappointed. I don't think that makes sense the way I said it, but this action just did not live up to what I think it should have. This isn't a unique trait to Ragnarok. A lot of Marvel movies have this problem with me, just none recently. The most recent one where parts of it were like this, I don't know, maybe the hand-to-hand in Civil War? I don't know. It was very odd to me that the action in this movie was not good. And I would go as far as to say that. Like, I legitimately think that the action in this movie was not good. So if the action in an action comedy doesn't work, you are left with the comedy. And this is where a lot of people are going to start forming their own opinions that are obviously going to be much different than mine, because I didn't find a lot of the comedy funny in this movie. I thought, if I'm being generous, about a quarter of it actually landed and made me at least chuckle. There were a couple of laugh out louds in there, but few and far between. And the rest of it was just, it didn't work. I don't understand what exactly it was. I think that it had something to do with this director has a very unique sense of humor. I've never seen any of his other movies, so I can't say this for sure, but it certainly felt like this was just simply a part of the style that I didn't personally like. If there was less humor, I would have probably not made this comment, but since there's so much humor across the entire movie, it's pretty necessary to point out that I just didn't laugh that much at all of the jokes. And so, that was pretty disappointing as well. I think that other people are going to like the humor in this more than I did. There were people in the theater that I was in that were laughing the whole time. And, you know, good for them. I think that it's certainly possible to find everything in this movie funny. A lot of people have. This is the highest rated Marvel movie for some reason. So a lot of people like it. It didn't work for me. And there's also a couple of other things that were just mediocre. I found that none of the performances were standout-ish. I expected much more from Cate Blanchett based on what I saw in the trailers, and she seemed to phone it in. Everybody else was fine. Jeff Goldblum was actually fantastic. He's the best part of the movie, I thought. Even though I didn't like his character, he was easily the funniest part of the movie. Yeah, but. I'm gonna cut that part out. He was easily the funniest part of the movie, though. The pacing for the entire movie was off. The scenes didn't seem to flow very well from one into the next. It felt very choppy, sort of like it was mishmashed and then kind of squished together. If that makes sense. It felt a little off to me. That seems to be a common theme of what I'm saying. Everything felt off. Nothing quite felt right with me, which some people might not have that problem at all. From what I've seen online, it doesn't seem like many people have that problem. Some of the visual effects were very good. Excellent, even. And some of them were awful. Just shockingly terrible for something... I'm very surprised by that, too. Where you'd have some shots in this movie that I think look amazing. And then there's other ones, particularly green screen effects in Norway, that were just awful. It was so noticeable, and it was... I don't understand, because you had so long to work on this movie. They were able to get so much of the visual effects, or at least most of them, right. Why not try harder on the other shots? You know? I don't understand. I found that to be very strange. I didn't find the story to be compelling at all. It felt somewhat basic. Nothing truly caught me off guard. Nothing... There were few... I don't know. The story, it just seemed very by the numbers to me. You kind of saw where everything was going. There were a few moments that were extraordinarily predictable. For example, they say something like, oh, I bet this thing won't ever happen again, and then that thing happens. You know what? I'm going to talk a little more about one particular thing after I give my rating, because there's a few spoilers I want to talk about, but I'll wait until I give the rating, and then I'll talk about those after that. The villain, I sort of mentioned that Cate Blanchett was phoning it in. Her character wasn't great at all. Exposition doesn't really bother me too much, but she was kind of an expositional machine, and so she was just spouting out, oh, this is where I came from, this is my motivation, all that stuff. Which, again, wasn't necessarily bad, it didn't work for me. Heimdall is in this movie. He doesn't need to be. He's so useless. He's supposed to be all-seeing, and they do kind of use that in one scene, but then throughout the rest of the movie, so there's this one part where he's leading a group of people towards a destination. I'm being intentionally vague because I don't really want to give it away. And there are bad guys waiting at this destination, and he doesn't realize that until they're all the way there. Like, you can't use your sight to just say, hey, maybe we shouldn't go this way. Maybe we should draw them out first, or should do something else. They're all standing right there. I can see that. But no, they don't. It doesn't do that for some reason. So I don't understand why, but he felt completely useless. If you took him out of the movie, it wouldn't have been a problem. It still would have been predictable that they were waiting at that spot, but it would have made more sense that at least everybody else wouldn't have seen it coming. You know what I mean? And then also, this doesn't really have to do with the film, so I'm not knocking the movie for it, even though it might sound like I am, but the marketing for this movie I wasn't a huge fan of, and what I mean by that is I thought that too much information was given away. For example, I wish that I had not known that the Hulk was in this movie, because they were talking up his character for a good 10 to 15 minutes before he actually showed up, and it just felt so tedious to me, because I knew for sure that he was in the movie. If I were to see the movie again, I don't think that I would have had this problem, but it did stand out to me because it was in the marketing campaign. Hulk is such a huge character in all the trailers and the posters, but he's not in the movie for that long. He's only in the movie for maybe he doesn't show up until at least an hour in. And so it was sort of strange to me. I wish that hadn't been in there. Another thing that I legitimately have a problem with the marketing for this. Again, it's not a knock on the movie, but the part where Hela destroys Thor's hammer in the trailer, and then she destroys it.
Well, it's a long story.
I wish that part had not been in the trailer, because what an interesting twist that would have been to just experience that in the movie for the first time. So shame on the trailer for that. Again, I'm not knocking the movie. It's just something that I wanted to point out. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 kind of had this problem a little bit, but not to the extent that Ragnarok does. Some of the humor is overly sexual, and it just doesn't fit in with the rest of the movie. For example, the devil's anus, and they mention it a couple... It's so awkward, and it doesn't feel like it fits in with the rest of the movie. But I don't know, it's so strange to me, because sexual humor can be really funny. Like in something like The Other Guys or Superbad, all of the sex in those movies is very funny to me, but it just doesn't fit in with the superhero stuff. Like, or at least not this superhero. You know, like Deadpool, it kind of worked, but it just doesn't, it's so out of place. And like I said, I had a little problem with Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but it's so much more noticeable in this movie. So, I don't know, it's strange. Also, I would like to point out that in Age of Ultron, one of my least favorite parts of that movie, my least favorite part of that movie, by far, is the relationship between Hulk and Black Widow. Because I think it's awful. It's so unnecessary, it's out of left field, they don't seem to have chemistry with one another, the writing for them is not good. Everything about the relationship is stupid, and I don't like it. And in this movie, it's without giving anything away, it's very briefly mentioned, and it's handled so much better that it seems to retroactively it makes me think that the one in Age of Ultron was actually good, even though I know it wasn't. It was still awful, and I hope they drop that, but it doesn't seem like they're going to. But it was kind of similar to, Blade Runner 2049, where they made Deckard and Rachel's relationship in the original so much better. Like, they just handled it so much better in 2049 that you think, oh wow, in the original it was so good, even though it wasn't. It felt very similar to that. I kind of wanted to point that out. So I guess that's a plus, that they made me care a little bit. So good for them. Yeah, you know what? I cannot tell you why this is the highest Marvel movie to date. That's a joke to me. No way in hell is this the best Marvel movie. It might be the best of the Thor movies. I'd have to see it again just to sort of maybe cement it. Maybe after a while I can sort of say that. But this is nowhere near the best Marvel movie. Here's a list. That's my personal ranking for Marvel movies as of right now. And the new Thor movie is probably in the lower half, I would say. Because it's so, I'm disappointed in a lot of stuff in this movie, even though I respect its ambition. I like that it tried to do something different, but it just didn't work for me. I didn't dislike the movie, though. Despite all of the negative things that I had to say about it, I didn't dislike it. I still had fun with it, but I actually read something on Twitter that I'll just paraphrase, and someone compared Ragnarok to cotton candy. It's fun, it's light, it's fluffy, but it's nothing but fluff and has no flavor to it. Because there's no substance to this movie, really, but it is a good time. So I'll definitely give it that. I would say for me it's probably a 14 out of 20. I would recommend watching it if you're a fan of the other Marvel movies. And if you're tired of if you say, oh, all of them are the same, this one definitely isn't the same. So you might either like it more than the rest of them, like it seems everybody else is, or you might like it less than the rest of them, which it seems like that's sort of the page that I'm on. But again, I still didn't dislike it. One other thing that I mentioned was somewhat of a spoiler. I thought that Doctor Strange should not have been in this movie. His scene completely took me out of it. Super unnecessary. I don't understand why he was in it at all. They could have, because he was supposed to lead them from, because Thor and Loki were on Earth looking for Odin, and then Doctor Strange kind of kidnaps them, but not really. And then he points them to where Odin is, but they could have found him on their own. It felt very unnecessary to me is all. There was another thing that I mentioned earlier about something about spoilers. Oh, it was the predictability part. So at the very beginning of the movie, I don't remember the character's name, but it's the one, he looks like the devil, basically. And so Thor, the beginning action scene that I mentioned that I liked, it was him fighting that guy and all of his minions in some dragon thing. And he takes his head off, and he brings the head back to Asgard and locks it in the vault. And he's like, well, I bet if I lock it in the vault, nothing bad will happen to that. But then they bring him back, and he causes Ragnarok at the end of the movie anyway. So it was very predictable that would happen. So I just wanted to point that out, even though it was a big spoiler. That's all I got to say about Thor Ragnarok. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.